Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, October the 30th, 2023. What were you doing on the Easter weekend 1983, if you were still alive? Any idea? Can you remember? I can remember that weekend. It was the end of towards the end of my second year at university, and I remember was living in North London in Archway, and I remember that weekend I did not go home to my parents for one reason or another. Maybe they were abroad, or maybe I just wanted to stay in London. I don't know. And I do remember we had a guest in the flat we were renting. That weekend. So Easter Monday, which I can kind of remember, it was that sort of long weekend. I don't know, I think it was a bit tedious that weekend. And, nothing particularly amazing happened. It was just a quiet weekend in London. But Easter Monday was perhaps significant for the maiden voyage of the Challenger space shuttle. Now, things had been going wrong for some time with the Challenger space shuttle. In January 1983, there'd been an attempted launch, but it had to be cancelled because there was something wrong. And then it had to, finally it went up in the air on April the 4th. And it was okay. It came back down. No harm done. But as we know, 3 years later, there was that terrible disaster in which all the astronauts were killed in front of the whole world. So maybe it was not a good day to be starting things. I mean, because the maiden voyage is a start. Now, if you look at Wikipedia, you can see that quite a few people were born on April the 4th, 1983. There's a list of sports people, a couple of ice hockey players, an actor. I'm sure they've all had very nice lives. So for them, it was okay. But another person who was born on Easter Monday, 1983, April the 4th, was Robert Card. Robert Card being the shooter in the massacre in Lewiston, Maine. I don't know what time he was born on April the 4th, 1983. I don't know where he was born. I assume he was born in Maine, but if he was born somewhere else, it's not going to make a great deal of difference to his horoscope if we don't have a time of birth. So in his case, there is kind of a parallel between him and the Challenger. The Challenger had its launch, had its beginning, and then 3 years later, it blew up, killing people. And I suppose with Robert Card, he was born April the 4th, 1983, and then just over 40 years later, likewise, he blew up and took a lot of people with him. I mean, many more people were killed in Lewiston, Maine, than during the Challenger disaster. So what I want to do is look at the horoscope of Robert Card. I also want to look at the chart for the maiden voyage of the Challenger space shuttle. I wasn't planning on doing that, but given we have an exact time for this launch, it was at 3:30 at the Kennedy Space Center on that day. We can have a quick look at that chart. It is actually quite a bad chart, even though on that it did come back from its mission. But before I look at these charts, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, October the 30th, 2023. So top right, that is a picture of Robert Card. Now, as far as what's going on astrologically, over the weekend we had all this drama with the full moon eclipse. This full moon eclipse is now breaking up, so we don't have this eclipse around anymore. Although we're still going to feel its influence, certainly for 2 weeks, probably perhaps longer than 2 weeks. Also, over the weekend, we had a Mars-Jupiter opposition. This Mars-Jupiter opposition is also starting to break up. So, in a way, after all that stress and tension over the weekend, today, Monday, may be a bit easier. I don't think it's not going to be quite so violent, and fraught with danger. And what we see happening today is that the moon goes into Gemini. It goes into Gemini at 3:08 p.m. in London. So just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon if you're in, I don't know, Paris or Berlin. So if you're in New York, that would be 11:08 a.m. And if you're in the West Coast, Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, that would be 8:08 a.m. So if you're in California, then you're going to really have a moon in Gemini for pretty much all the day, or the whole day. If you're in New York, from the late morning onwards. If you're in Western Europe, it's going to be sort of late afternoon and the evening. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, not really. The moon's pretty much going to be in late Taurus all day long. So it does depend where you are. But if you are in Europe, America, a lot of Asia, at some stage the moon will move from Taurus to Gemini. And, that is going to create a change. It's going to finally break up the immediate influence of the full moon eclipse, because no longer will it be the case that the sun and the moon are in opposite signs. The sun in Scorpio, moon in Taurus. So when the moon goes into Gemini, there's a certain relief that intensity is over. There's a little more flexibility, but we don't want to exaggerate that, because the trouble is that the moment the moon goes into Gemini, it makes a square aspect to Saturn. So in a way, one type of restriction is replaced by another type of restriction. Many of us might find that, perhaps there are authority figures to deal with. Maybe, employers are just being a pain. There are just these things which are sort of holding us back. But I don't want to say that it's going to be a major problem. The moon is a fast-moving planet. I know it's not really a planet, it's a satellite, but in astrologers we call it a planet, for simplicity's sake. So in the run-up to the moon making the square to Saturn, just there may be a certain sense of which we can't really get a lot done. And I think in general we're not going to be able to get a lot done today. I don't think that today is particularly interesting. Nonetheless, it's interesting enough for me to have done forecasts for the 12 signs, as usual. So here are my forecasts for today, which is Monday, October the 30th, 2023. Aries, recent pressure is starting to ease, and there may be a feeling that things are getting back to normal. There is nothing you have to do, and you can just be yourself. However, it may not be a good day for travelling. When you're moving around, the pressure returns, and it's also possible that there are delays. Taurus, today should be fine, provided you think ahead. Consider what might go wrong. Consider the many ways in which people can react to you. And if you think you're going to be asked an important question, then you have to have an answer prepared. Financial issues can be dealt with in one of two ways. Gemini, you found it difficult to make an impact because the situation wasn't aligned with your fundamental personality. But things are now changing. There's a space for Geminis, and their contribution will be much appreciated. It's about saying things that go against the grain, but which are also very wise. And popularity should not be your main priority. Cancer. In some ways, you can see your limitations. You can't be everyone's friend, and there are people out there who you just don't get on with. And if today you have any social dealings, they are likely to be unsatisfactory. But one or two people are worth getting to know. You've got something important to share with them. Leo, in a certain sense, you're in a process of rediscovery, leaving the world in one state and coming back to see something very different. And the rapidity of change can often be distressing, remembering that Leo is a fixed sign who at some level likes things to stay the same. Certain situations have had their day. Virgo, the higher the profile, the bigger the responsibility, and the higher the possibility of being criticized, the more you have to, the more you have the more you want to have a big profile for yourself, the more likely it is that you get attacked on a verbal level. So as you move forward, don't be surprised if someone tries to hold you back. In this light, certain relationships could grind you to a standstill if you let them. But if you act courageously, you'll eventually win through. Libra, you feel like it is time for a change, and you may be tempted to actually do something to engineer this change. But you have to keep your expectations in check. If you get the chance you are looking for, or you think you are looking for, then you may be disappointed with the results. A change of attitude is more often effective than a change of location. Scorpio, you are starting to calm down, but nonetheless, you shouldn't underestimate the impact of your actions. You can indeed be a focus for good and bad. So before doing anything new, consider what you are trying to achieve, and don't play around with other people with other people's emotions. The response might not be what you expect. Sagittarius, you feel the need for company, perhaps because you're looking for variety, or you just want someone to talk to. But everything has a cost, and casual meetings could turn out to be a real burden. Also, any relationship has the potential to restrict your freedom, especially today when the moon is moving towards a square aspect with Saturn. Capricorn, it's important to be tolerant. You might be wise and reasonable, but you still have to be careful how you evaluate other people's actions. There's a good reason for most things, but it isn't always clear. Yet at some stage there is a meeting, and there is a fine line between a discussion and a confrontation. Aquarius, there's some danger that you sabotage yourself in terms of how you express and enjoy yourself. For some reason, you don't feel that it is right to enjoy yourself, so you might put down a series of unconscious obstacles. But if you can somehow engage heart and mind in a favourite activity, you can end up having a great day. Pisces. It needn't be a bad Monday. The moon is moving into a very grounded sector of your solar chart where it aspects Saturn. There might be chaos, especially at home, but you have what it takes to control the situation. And the best way to stamp your authority is to be firm but open-minded, and you must be ready to give people a choice, because people like having choices, even if it's a choice where they don't really have a choice. Okay, so I will now switch to the I Ching. So, as usual, I ask the question, what is Monday going to be like for people watching this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 40, deliverance. Deliverance is a rather good hexagram, although it does allude to a difficult situation. It seems that many of us are in a difficult situation. There's something we're involved in which may not be going well. It may be people we're involved with. And, we're sort of wondering, how are we going to get out of it? How are we going to escape? And deliverance provides an escape route. So if there's something that's really bothering you and you want to get out, then now might be your chance. Indeed, you might already be in the process of escaping. So that is good news. But don't hang around. If you're in a difficult situation and you want out, now's the time for out. It's like now's the time to get out. The door is open. But how long will that door stay open for? So don't think about it. Just drop it, and you will be delivered. So that's good news. And the first hexagram moves. So because the first hexagram moves, that first hexagram, the first line moves, not the first hexagram. This first line is the bottom line is broken, and it moves to being unbroken. So that is the escape route. That is the opportunity to drop it, move on to something else. It's there for you. And so that move happens, and it moves. So we move to a new hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram 54, marrying maiden, the marrying maiden. Okay, so this can manifest in a number of ways. One possibility is that we're in a bad situation, we escape, and having escaped from a bad situation, we kind of think, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. We actually might want to go back to it. We sort of return, and of course, if we return, we probably won't get another chance to escape. Maybe someone will tempt us into going back. Someone will say, oh, that's okay. You can give it another go. No, that's not a good idea to give it another go. Another way of looking at the marrying maiden is to say, well, it's about how we behave. The marrying maiden represents a type of, she represents a type of behavior which perhaps should be avoided. I mean, from a symbolic point of view, the marrying maiden in the I Ching is about a young woman, who is just, very keen to get married, and she's in a hurry to get married, and she's very impulsive. She sort of storms in and sort of upsets the Confucian order, and so the advice here is to not do that, not upset the order, take it slowly. If the marrying maiden wants to be successful but also respected, she needs to take it slowly. So, having got out of this potentially very dangerous situation referred to in the previous hexagram of 40 deliverance, we now have to take it slowly. The danger could return, so take it slowly. Yeah, it doesn't mean to say we come to a standstill. We move slowly forward, but in a dignified way, and then in the end, we get to where we need to get to. So dignity, I think, is important. So overall, the I Ching suggests that it needn't be a bad day, provided we behave correctly. Okay, so let's move back to the astrology. I first wanted to just look at the launch of the maiden voyage of the Challenger, which was Easter Monday, April the 4th, 1983, 1:30 p.m. Kennedy Space Center, which is pretty much Cape Canaveral. I think there might be a slight difference between the two, but a few kilometers. But I'm not a great expert on the geography of Florida. So this is the launch. So you could argue that this chart is the birth chart for the Challenger. This is the time. This is when it all started. So you can see that there was a Mars-Pluto opposition right on the midheaven. So the midheaven was at 133 Taurus, and Mars was on the midheaven, and Pluto was on the IC, and also Saturn was on the IC. So there was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction on the IC, opposition Mars. I mean, one would have been afraid to get on board that thing if one had known about astrology. But it's a reminder that disaster can happen in many different ways. It was the beginning of the Challenger as an entity, and it took 3 years before the malefic potential of this opposition came to pass. Maybe you could actually see it by direction, perhaps. So if you look in this case, Mars was at 29-24 Aries, so it was about 3 degrees off the opposition to 3 degrees off the opposition to Saturn. So you might say, from a symbolic point of view, 3 degrees equals 3 years. I think it was 1986, wasn't it? It wasn't 86. Yeah, it was 1980. It was beginning of 1986 that the Challenger happened. So that kind of fits pretty exactly. So 3 years later, this Mars-Pluto opposition swung around, hit the Saturn, and that symbolized when it all went wrong. 3 degrees equals 3 years. So it's quite a simple chart in terms of looking at how bad things were. Saturn-Pluto conjunction would be, I suppose, a lot of pressure, a lot of tension. plenty of scope for things to go wrong, especially with Mars opposition this. And I think that Mars opposition, that Saturn, Pluto, and Mars in Aries on the midheaven kind of indicates the whole impatience of the project. The impatience to get things launched. Already there'd been a delay. This thing was supposed to have been launched in January 1983, and it wasn't launched until April. Yeah, a lot of impatience. Let's get this thing done. And of course, later on in the beginning of 1986, when you had all these kind of problems about not wanting to take the fuel out and the freezing weather, there was real pressure to get this thing moving, get this thing in the air, and that's the Mars in Aries, really wanting things to happen. Let's launch this thing, and of course it was that impatience which led to the disaster. So that's a challenger time chart. Unfortunately, with Robert Card, the main shooter, we do not have a time chart. I've set his birth date for his birthplace for Lewiston, Maine, but honestly, it doesn't matter. If I haven't got a time of birth, it really doesn't matter. The planets are going to be similar. If I'd set in a similar position, if I'd set it for noon in California, wherever. So this is a chart of a human being, Robert Card. So what strikes us about it? Okay, he's an Aries, impulsive. I think wasn't he a he was into firearms. I think I read one report where he was a firearms instructor. So Aries is very often like things that explode. They like action, that kind of thing. But he had a Mars opposition Pluto, like the Challenger launch, Mars opposition Pluto. That is incredible potential for being angry. A lot of anger there. That makes sense, and kind of storing it up, Mars opposition Pluto. Although it's been said that in the run-up to this to his shooting, there was he sort of had a mental health crisis, and he was hearing voices. So I don't know what was going on there, but his mental health was had been under pressure, certainly this year. But so that's certainly something to consider. His desire to make things happen. Look, he's got Jupiter-Uranus opposition. A Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, I suppose. That can be quite explosive. In many respects, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction can be quite fortunate. Ebertin, thank the Lord conjunction. That's one way of looking at it, the most optimistic way of looking at it. But wanting freedom, wanting to express oneself, and I suppose also being frustrated. I think he had recently been fitted with hearing aids, because I don't know why his hearing, he lost his hearing, whether it was just a sort of natural process. I don't know how bad it was. Did it have anything to do with his playing around with firearms without proper ear protection? I don't know. But that was probably very frustrating for him. Even, can't have done much for his self-esteem, I suppose. So that might have been part of it. Notice in terms of elemental balance that Robert Card is quite fiery. He's got Sun, Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter. Those are the traditional planets. He's got 4 of the 7 traditional planets in fire signs, plus Neptune in Sagittarius, Uranus in Sagittarius, South Node in Sagittarius. This is someone who wants action, wants things to happen. Is not going to, when he gets, you know, held back, he can get sort of, he can get, I suppose, quite angry. And I wonder how that fire works in terms of mental health. I see, fire, and it's quite intuitive. That's the way Jung saw fire. And when Jung works in it also, when fire works in its like best possible way, it sort of knows things. Jung's famous comment that he doesn't believe in God. He knows that God exists, and that's Jung, the Leo. That's a very fiery thing to say. But what if fire is working kind of like that, but with someone who's got mental health problems? That might, I suppose, work as in the way of hearing voices. You just know, but you don't really know. You know because you're hearing voices. What's clearer than that? So maybe it's working something like that. Notice he's got no traditional planets in air signs. He's only got one traditional planet in a water sign, and that is his Saturn in Scorpio. So, air and water in the sort of, from a Jungian point of view, those two are the rational axis, air and water. So rationality is about, I suppose, using one's intellect and one's feelings to work out what is right. He clearly wasn't able to do that, although I don't think we still know very much about him. Now his Mars. He has a Mars-Neptune trine. So, I talk a lot about Mars and Neptune, the hard aspects. But what about a trine? Neptune could just be about fantasy. It could be all these ideas about what he thinks the world is like. And Mars trine Neptune could just make it all too easy. I seem to remember, when I was learning astrology, someone suggesting that in certain situations you could associate trines with mental health problems, because it's all too easy. You can't just have a situation where hearing voices suggests there's no resistance. Mars trine Neptune, or getting the impulse to do something that's insane. That's a trine thing, because if it's a square, you have some challenge. You think, hold on, is this really the right thing to do? But trine, it's easy, just do it, don't even think about it. And of course, talking about thinking about it, he's got no traditional planets in air signs. So that's probably quite important. Notice that he's got the Neptune on the South Node. Now, I understand everyone born in April 1983 has got Neptune, well, certainly around Easter of 1983 has got Neptune on the South Node, and they don't come to, nothing particularly bad happens to them. But in his case, remember, we don't have his time of birth, but in his case, that Neptune on the South Node is obviously not working very well. The South Node is our line of least resistance. Neptune on the South Node is a sort of our fantasies are our line of least resistance. And I suppose you put Mars trine that, and I suppose that's so that shows the aggression, and so it's just all too easy. Now, as far as what was happening at the time of the shooting, looking at it in terms of transits, we can, if we look at the time of a shooting, what do we notice? Well, we notice that the time of a shooting, the Sun was at 216 Scorpio. So the Sun was exactly conjunct his Saturn. So that Saturn is conjunct his Pluto and opposition his Mars. So in the few days leading up to the shooting, he'd had Sun triggering Mars, his Mars opposition Saturn, and Mars opposition Pluto. And then, so it was Sun was going over it, and then finally, when the Sun hit the Saturn, that's when it all happened. There is a connection in astrology. I think it was Reinhold Ebertin who talked about it, that the Saturn on the ascendant can represent hearing problems. That kind of makes sense because the ascendant is how one perceives the world. It's one of the ways in which we pick up stuff from the world, and I suppose if Saturn's on the ascendant, that might suggest deafness. In his case, Sun conjunct Saturn with the hearing aids. Maybe it was a big issue, having these hearing aids fitted, his hearing being damaged, and because there is a link between Saturn and hearing. So maybe that was part of the issue, that Sun conjunct Saturn, because this sort of deafness comes in, and I think there are a lot of the deaf community were killed as well. I don't know why, but that was part of what was going on. Then there is his solar return, the solar return prior to the shooting. So this is the positions of the planets on his 40th birthday, April the 40th, 2023. Sorry, April the 4th, 2023. I suppose the 40th birthday for some of us can be quite stressful. I suppose it's a real sign that we're getting older, I suppose. Maybe things went wrong after his 40th birthday. I don't know. So what about his 40th birthday? Sun conjunct Chiron. He had, if you're into Chiron is about wounds. It's about the wounded healer. It's about feeling wounded. So in the run up to his birthday, he has had Chiron conjunct his Sun. So he may have felt at some level wounded. Remember, we don't have a time of birth. I know that sounds like rather glib. Oh, Chiron conjunct Sun, he felt wounded. But there was some wound that wasn't healing. Whether it was a psychological wound or a physical wound. So that's one thing. Another thing about this chart is there's a grand trine in water signs between Saturn in Pisces, Mars in Cancer, and South Node in Scorpio. So you can see that that grand trine means that the South Node is on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. And the North Node, South Node, in this case, we can regard it as his connections. That's what the nodal axis it can be about, not just about karma. And so with the South Node on his Mars-Saturn midpoint, South Node is about the people around him, how he connects with them. Mars-Saturn is about can be about decay, about feelings of disintegration and destruction and death. So as a solar return prior to killing a lot of people, having the South Node, South Node or North Node, but the nodal axis, because the North Node is here, the North Node on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Worst, I suppose, killing a lot of people does fit. But it might also give us some idea about the run-up. In the run-up to that, he may have felt that all the people around him were really bringing him down. The people he was involved with, he just found that they were just really disturbing. He could see the sort of decay around him, that the people around him were having a bad effect on him. And then in the end, he responded to the situation, just over 6 months later, by killing a lot of people. Again, North Node on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I finally want to look at his solar arc directions. So remember, solar arc directions is when you move everything in the horoscope by 1 degree for 1 year. So if you want to know what's going to happen when he's 40 years old, you move everything 40 degrees. So that gives us his solar arc directed chart. So we can then look at how this solar arc directed chart affects his natal chart. So what I wanted to focus on is his Mars-Pluto opposition. So he's got, in his natal chart, he's got a Mars-Pluto opposition. So we can move this Mars-Pluto opposition 1 degree every year. So if we want to know what's going to be like happen 40 years later, we move the Mars-Pluto opposition 40 degrees. So if we move it 40 degrees, Mars moves through to around 852 Gemini. Remember, we don't know precisely when he's born. It'll be around 8-9 Gemini. And likewise, Pluto also moves. So there we've moved the Mars-Pluto opposition. And we can see, but this has just been moved exactly onto his Uranus. So what's happened is Mars-Pluto opposition has directed onto his Uranus, and this is when he killed all those people. And I think that kind of fits. Uranus is this sudden explosion. And this outrage happens on October the 25th, 2023. Okay, so that is Robert Card's chart. I'm sorry I don't have a time of birth, but I kind of think it is interesting that he was born on the same day as the Challenger was launched. Okay, that's all I'm going to say for today. Thank you for listening. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.